Thank you. When I was in high school, I was absolutely not the most gifted athlete on the football field, but all of my friends were going to play football, so I decided to go out there and play football as well. Well, while they were out there getting their uniforms filthy, I was sitting the bench, keeping mine very clean. In fact, I remember I felt so awkward that I would rub my hand on the sidelines, rub my hands in the dirt, and then rub my hands on my uniform so it looked like I was out there playing. Well, at the end of the season, we were going to have a varsity dinner to give awards to all the varsity players for that season. And they were calling the names out in alphabetical order, and M, of course, my last name, so I waited all through the alphabet till my name was called. And when I went up to get my varsity letter, now you all understand, maybe some of you who went to really, really small schools, varsity letters are the huge letters that you wear on your sweater that you give to your girl. The junior varsity letters were the little tiny ones that you could barely see with a magnifying glass. So I don't know what you do with them. Well, I was expecting, because I was on the varsity team, excuse me, I was expecting when I went up there to get my varsity letter. And so the coach called my name, and I was just proud as could be, proud as the proverbial peacock. And I went up to the stage, and what he gave me was a little dinky JV letter. I was 17, I guess, at the time. That was 50 years ago. I'm 67, 50 years ago. I still remember it like it was just last week. And so at the end of the dinner, I left the JV letter on the table under my napkin. Now, everyone knows what it's like to be passed over for something special, to fail to make the team, so to speak. We all know what it's like to watch from the sidelines as others break tackles and score touchdowns to the thunderous applause of the crowd while we're sitting there on the bench. Very few of us really make the first string in the team of life. But sometime early in my Christian years, I learned a wondrous truth. What people esteem, God detests. You'll find that in Luke chapter 16 and verse 15. What most people reject, God chooses. That's what Paul said. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and the weak to shame the things which are strong, that no one should boast before God. You see, God has no second string team. God has no second string players. The evangelists and the pastors who minister to hundreds, the parents who train their children in the faith, the laborers who sacrifice their time and their resources to help the poor, whatever their vocation, all those who serve God are on His first string team. I want to talk this afternoon about being chosen. God has chosen you. Now, I'm not going to call your names out because I'm recording this, but God has chosen you, and you, and you, and you. God has chosen specifically, not in the grand scheme of things. God didn't say, oh yes, I think I'll choose her, or I'll choose him. No. God, in the grand scheme of things, said, I'm going to choose, and then by name. For example, you think I'm kidding, right? No, I never kid about this stuff. Isaiah chapter 43. Do not fear, 43 verse 1. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Remember what Jesus said in John chapter 10? My sheep know my voice, and I call them by name. Go back to Isaiah. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you. Verse 4. You are precious in my sight. You are honored, and I love you. By name. Moving over to Isaiah chapter 46. Listen to me, verse 3. Listen to me, you who have been born by me or carried by me from birth. You've been carried by me from the womb. Even to your old age, I will be the same. To your graying years, I will bear you, and I have done it. I will carry you, I will bear you, and I will deliver you. God has chosen you. Don't tell him he made a mistake. Like last week we talked about, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago. God has forgiven you. Don't argue with him. How is it that we, jars of clay, made from the dust of the earth, when God says something is true, we say to him, I don't think so. Mark chapter 3. Verse 13, Jesus went up to the mountain, and he summoned, or he called, he invited to himself those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And so he appointed the 12, that they would be with him, and that he would send them out to preach, to proclaim the message, and to have authority over, to cast out demons. Now, he chose specifically 12 in this passage in Mark chapter 3. But we're going to see in just a few minutes that Jesus also chose 70, Luke chapter 10. And we'll also see in Acts chapter 1, or Acts chapter 2, he chose 120. It's not just the 12. Let me make it more applicable. God did not just choose our pastors and our priests and our bishops. He didn't just choose them. He chose each and every single person in this room. To do what? 2 Peter chapter 2. God has chosen us to proclaim the excellencies of his glory to others. God has chosen you and me. Whenever I think about this, I have to stop just for a moment and consider that Almighty God could certainly have chosen to use the angels in heaven to proclaim his message to the whole world. Certainly they have more power than you and I. They are more holy than you and I. But God did not choose the angels. God chose flesh and blood that is decaying even as we're sitting here. God has chosen us to proclaim that message. It was to the 70 in Luke chapter 10 that Jesus said, whatever city you enter and they receive you, eat what is set before you and heal those in it who are sick, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near to you. Acts chapter 2. The day of Pentecost had come. They were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting, all 120 of them. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire, distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. Let me make the point again, because it's important that you and I get this point. You are not a second-string player in God's kingdom. You don't have to sit on the sidelines, rubbing your hand in the dirt, and then wiping it on your uniform, so that others will think that you're out there in the battle. You are God's first string. And I don't care what your physical condition is right now. I don't care if you can't walk upright, if you can't hear, if you can't see. You are still called by God, privileged by God, to be his first string player. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We should always give thanks to God for you, beloved, because God has chosen you from the beginning for salvation through sanctification by the Spirit and faith in the truth. Now, I had thought of an illustration to help make this point, and I thought of some political figures that I could say, so-and-so invited you to join him in dinner, routinely join with him or her for dinner. You got an engraved invitation every week. What would it matter what other people think of you? But then I thought, if I use anyone's name, then you may say, well, I wouldn't want to go with her or with him. It wouldn't matter. So I decided to use a generic, well-known personality. How's that? For safety. Well-known personality. If you and I received an invitation every week from this well-known, worldwide known personality to join him or her for dinner every week because they wanted to be in your company. Think about that. Because I thought about that. If I had received that kind of an invitation, it wouldn't matter what my neighbor thinks of me. It wouldn't matter what my colleagues at work think of me. Because I am invited to this person's house every week. Well, of course, those are far-fetched examples, because ain't nobody going to be inviting me or you, worldwide known personality, for dinner. But, and you should know where I'm going with this, but someone far greater than any king or president or prime minister, King of kings and Lord of lords, every day invites you and me to dine with him. Remember that passage in Revelation chapter 3? Behold, I stand where? At the door, and if anyone hears me and opens the door, what? I will come in with him and dine with him, and he with me. He knows your importance to him. You and I are precious. You and I are precious to him. Not in a generic sense. You know, I've got to read this. I got to read this. It's come to my mind now twice since I'm speaking, and I kind of paraphrased it once. And let me just read it from what it says, word for word. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs in by another way, he's a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. That's every day. Every day we are getting the invitation from the King of Kings. You're getting the invitation from the Lord of Lords. Romans chapter 8, verse 31. Sorry, I got a cold the other night, so it's why my voice cracks like I'm a teenager going through my teen years. I guess it kind of worked when I talked about my teen experience on the football team. My voice is now cracking again. Romans chapter 8, verse 31. If God is for us, who is against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Our neighbor, our colleague, our family member? Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? He goes on in that text to make the point as clear and as final as he can make it. The answer to the question, who can separate us? Paul says, nothing and no one will ever separate us from God's love. That's how much the Almighty Father loves you and thinks of you. It's that one who has chosen you. It is that one who has called you every day to himself. It doesn't get any more privileged or personal than that. Doesn't get any more privileged or personal than that. Some time ago, I was reading in the Psalms, Psalm 24. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, be ye lifted up, you everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lifted up, ye everlasting doors. And as I'm reading this, the Lord substituted a word here that I want to read to you. And then I want you to substitute for yourself the word that should be very clear in a moment. Psalm 24. Lift up your heads, O Richard. Lift up your head, Richard. Be lifted up, Son of God, child of God, that the King of glory may come into your body and live his life through you. Who is the King of glory? Oh, we know who he is. Now I want you to recite, lift up your heads, and then add your name to it. Because God is saying to you and to me, be lifted up, rejoice, dance, because the King of glory has come into you. Every day he wants to dine with you and with me. Who cares what people think of us when the King, before whose feet every king on earth will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Excuse me. That's the one who's chosen you. That's the one who calls you to be his own. as I was preparing, this has been a great message to prepare. A lot of things came to my mind as I'm preparing this. This hymn that Nancy and I used to sing in various churches. Many of you know the lyrics. Leaning on the everlasting arms. 19th century, Elisha Hoffman. Excuse me. What a fellowship. What a joy divine. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness. What a peace is mine. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarm. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near. Leaning on the everlasting arms. John chapter 4, verse 36. Jesus is speaking. He says this. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for a harvest. Already he who reaps, I hope I can finish this. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for life eternal, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this case the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. Everyone in this room, first string players and everyone in this room will receive that varsity letter. Everyone at the judgment. If you're doing work for Jesus, you're on that first string, and you will receive, when he calls your name, there's a new name written down in glory. Oh, it's mine, I know it's mine. When my name is called, and when your name is called. You serving Jesus today? If you are, when your name is called, you're going to walk up to that podium, and you're going to get that varsity letter. I don't know what it's going to look like. I doubt they'll have sweaters, but it'll be varsity. God has chosen you. In his opinion, and this is my conclusion, in God's opinion, you are very important, very special. You are God's possession. Put out of your mind the lie that is fostered and nurtured by the devil himself, that you are a nobody. It's a lie straight from hell itself. Satan is a liar and the father of lies, and whenever he tries to dissuade you from feeling good about yourself and your relationship with the King, whenever he tries to dissuade you from that, he is speaking from his own devilish and hurtful nature. Listen to God. He tells us again and again and again in here. He tells us again and again how special you are, how special I am.